Governor,
Sure.
thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
You bet.
So I want to start with immigration because it's a really hot topic in the national political discussion right now. And I want to start with a philosophical question that I'll admit I'm stealing from my colleague Kyle Clark. When you think about being governor of Colorado, do you view it as your job to represent everyone who lives in Colorado, whether they're here legally or illegally?
Well, I look at a lot of what we do as the general well-being of the state, and that does affect everybody. But a huge part of our emphasis has been on creating jobs. And we are pretty emphatic that we're trying to create jobs for people that are here illegally. We're not trying to create a rising tide of jobs that's going to help everybody. And we've spoken, frequently about the importance of, making sure that the people who are hiring people, that they make sure those people have proper documentation. When I ran for re-election, and actually when I ran in 2010, you meet a number of people that had a commercial painting company or a sheetrock company, whatever, some in construction or not, but they had always played by the rules, would only hire people who had authentic documentation, and they couldn't compete with some of the companies, the small businesses that were less, were hiring people illegally, paying them less, not paying them, withholding taxes. And these guys had had their businesses one guy had had his business for 18 years, one guy had had it for 25 years, and they'd gone out of business. And you hear a couple of those stories and you say, it makes sense, this is the 21st century, we need to continue making sure the jobs we create are for people that have legal papers to work.
And that being said, you've signed legislation aimed at offering some measure of assistance to people without legal status here, both on driver's licenses I can think of and college tuition. So what's your duty to them?
I think the driver's licenses, we want to make the roads safer. And there's a compelling argument that if someone's in an accident and they don't have any kind of a license or a legal document that shows that they're supposed to be driving that vehicle, they'll leave the scene of the accident. And that's unsafe for the parties in another vehicle if that happens. It makes it harder to figure out what happened in an accident, make sure that the accident is clearly defined. So that's really, and I think in almost every Western state now is using that, those kinds of licenses to make sure the roads are safer. The in-state tuition, most of those kids came over when they were 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years old. They didn't have a choice in whether they're here or not. Hopefully at some point we'll get this whole immigration resolved in an equitable way, but it seems that they should have a right to, again, they're going to pay for their tuition. They're not going to have it subsidized by the government, but that we shouldn't be charging them a higher rate.
Yeah, essentially you view it as they grew up here, so it's sort of a different
right.
animal. So State House Majority Leader Cassandra Duran told us recently, quote, "The immigrants that live in our country are Americans for all intents and purposes." Do you share that philosophy?
Well, it depends on how, again, that's language and that's pretty malleable. Mm-hmm. I can see calling everyone who lives here as Americans. With the Native Americans who were here before we had this country, were they Americans? I mean, it's how you use the language. But to a certain extent, if you believe the melting pot, that all the Italians that came and all the Irish that came, these different waves of immigration we've had, ultimately they all became Americans. And my expectation is at some point we will figure out a process by which those people that want to stay here, and there are a lot of people that believe a significant number of the people that are here illegally really don't want to become American citizens, right? They want to be able to go back to, Asia or Mexico, wherever it is they've been, but they just want to be able to come and work for a period of time and ship money back to their families in a different country. But for those who want to stay or have built lives here, we've got to figure out some process for, assimilating them into the fabric of our society.
So I want to play out something here. If Donald Trump were to win and start the mass deportation program that he's promised to on the campaign trail, we're looking at 180,000 or so people being kicked out of the state, which is a population bigger than Fort Collins. What would you do about that if there was a Trump administration trying to take that action as governor of this state?
Well, it's hard to imagine. Those are federal decisions, so in many cases that we wouldn't have a voice. That being said, I can't imagine that happening. Again, how many of these people own homes, real estate, paying taxes, are crucial employees in a business somewhere. It would be so disruptive to the economic fabric of the state that I just can't imagine that anybody would stand by and let that happen. That whether it's the Chamber of Commerce or, it would have the potential. And I'm not an economist. It would have the potential of putting the whole state into recession.
Yeah. Would you consider a lawsuit or something like that? Or would you want to explore that as an avenue if this was the path we started to go down as a country?
Well, I don't. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm the last person.
You got one though. You got a few.
Yeah, but I think I think it's unlikely given all the polling we've seen so far that Donald Trump's going to be the next president. But if he is, I think it's unlikely he'd ever try something like that. And he's already backing away from anything. Now his most recent comments are, we're going to have a deportation task force that's really going to look at deporting, dangerous criminals. Well, that's a very different thing than what he was saying 10 months ago. And I think recognizes the reality that trying to remove 11 million people from the United States would be a very difficult task, and one that would probably do much more harm to the economy than good.
Yeah, difficult and expensive probably.
Right, exactly.
But would you want to stop that from happening?
Yeah, of course. I mean, as I said, I've spent a majority of my time as governor trying to create jobs, focusing on the economy, trying to maintain the great momentum we have in Colorado. This is the kind of thing that would not only disrupt the momentum in Colorado, but for the entire country. And you take years of hard work to try and help small businesses get started, make it easier for them to grow and hire more people, improve our workforce training processes, and to have that all wiped out by, a demagogue. It'd be very. I certainly try to push back every way I could, and if there were legal avenues, I would certainly explore them.
So, assuming the other possible outcome, are you warming to the idea of a job in a Hillary Clinton administration?
No, not really. I mean, I look. Right now, Colorado is on the top 2 or 3 states in every measure of workforce, economic growth, new jobs. We have some workforce training programs with a partnership with LinkedIn, the business experiential learning, our apprenticeship programs that are going out. These are models for the whole country. Colorado the Beautiful, making an inventory of every open space of any kind, federal, state, county, whatever that open space is, we're going to have an inventory and then we're going to map all the trails, bike trails, hiking trails, and take that inventory and make a workable map that any person who comes to Colorado can actually see where they can go and how they can use these trails. I mean, no one's ever done this stuff before. This is, exciting. I haven't seen anything in a presidential administration that is as hands-on and as exciting as what we're doing in Colorado.
And yet you told me you'd consider it at least if the offer were made. So I'm curious, how much are you trying to loop in your new Lieutenant Governor, Donna Lynne?
Certainly, I mean, Donna Lynne is one of the most capable people I know. And I've been lucky to have, a number of really strong women over the last dozen years play significant roles, right? You go back to Kelly Brough and Roxanne White. I mean, there's a whole long list I could make. Donna Lynne is as talented and as experienced as anybody. So we've already given her tremendous, real expansive responsibilities. And everything we put on her plate, she devours it perfectly. So if I had to leave, I would not feel a second's regret that she couldn't handle the job. But that being said, I mean, this is in terms of rewarding, something that you wake up every day and you want to go to work. This is a job that is, just invigorating. And I can't see any of the jobs in Washington having that same appeal.
So both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton told me they support the concept that local government should have the right to block or control fracking if that's what the voters in the city want. Trump's campaign has backpedaled on his answer since then. So does that make Trump the better candidate for Colorado's oil and gas industry?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think, again, if you're in the oil and gas industry or any industry and someone like Donald Trump gets elected who, he's so impulsive, he can't make up his mind one day to the next what his real commitment is or what his real policy is. That kind of uncertainty is the antithesis. It's the opposite of what every business needs to be able to be successful, to plan your capital investments, when you're going to buy that new equipment, when you're going to buy those new vehicles. To make those kinds of expenditures, you've got to have predictability. So even though he might be better or a little bit better on fracking, it's hard to say where he is on fracking, or where he is on almost anything.
Do you think he's a little bit better on fracking?
I haven't heard it yet. Maybe he is, but from his comments when he was here before, he supported, he said wanted full local control. Well, that's pretty close to identical to what Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton had said.
Yeah, so that being said, you're actively campaigning for Hillary Clinton, and yet you have actively opposed this idea of local control of fracking. So how do you square those two things?
Well,
or have you talked to her about it?
I haven't, but if my understanding of when she made those comments, she was saying that local control in concert with your state constitution, she believes in the rule by law, that local control will have a firm regulatory restriction on fracking and expanding oil and gas. My concern has always been private property and the value of someone's leases in our anywhere in the state of Colorado is protected in our Constitution. So somehow that would have to get her wish for local control, but local control that's in concert with our state Constitution means we'd have to balance things out, which is what we're trying to do anyway. I'm not against local control, and I've said the other day, I don't think local control can ban. I think that is unlawful. It goes against the Constitution if local authorities ban fracking in their community. It's a taking, and it's okay if if you want to take someone's property in this country. I mean, we're not in China or Russia. There's a pathway that you can do it. It's through eminent domain. There's an estimation of what the value is. The local community would, maybe in the state might be a partner, we would offer some value, some significant part of the value of that asset to whoever the property owner is. That's how in this country we deal with taking property for the greater benefit of a community. So I'm not saying it couldn't happen, it's just got to be done in a way that I think is fair and legal.
So about that draft executive order to move the state further towards renewable energy, the Denver Post editorial board went pretty far in tagging you as trying to gun for an administration job and using that to prep for it. I want to let you address that first, and then I got to follow up.
Sure. What we said a couple years ago, or a year and a half ago, whenever the Clean Power Plan came out, we're a mile high, and the quality of our air is more important to our citizens than probably in almost any other state. We are the highest state in the country in terms of average altitude. So we recognize that particulates and ozone, these elements of pollution that come from burning coal, are a real challenge for us. What I had said a year and a half ago, and I've said frequently since then, is we're going to continue looking at what are the ways that we can continue to improve air quality without increasing the cost to our consumers of electricity. And by consumers, I mean people in their homes and their families, or also businesses. And I think what we said in the executive order, and I'm still kind of perplexed that people twist it out of proportion. We just said, let's get all the stakeholders together. And we're not going to do an end run. Whatever we come up with is going to depend upon legislation being passed. We'll have to have rulemaking go through the appropriate rulemaking processes. Obviously, it would include more wind and solar. It would include more natural gas, probably less coal. But coal is losing. This is not because of our decisions that coal is being used less and less. That's happening all over the country. Right now, coal takes a lot of labor to get it out of the ground. And natural gas and solar, natural gas and wind are now significantly less expensive than coal. If you're starting from scratch, building a coal plant or a natural gas plant, natural gas would be significantly less expensive, not to mention much cleaner. So that's the challenge. We're very clear that we want to make sure that if we are eliminating those jobs in some of the smaller towns in the West Slope from the coal mining activities, that we do everything we can to get broadband there, make sure we have job training, support entrepreneurs starting businesses in those communities to try and make up for those jobs.
So I think I heard in there you were trying to address concerns from Republicans who say you don't have the authority to set the numbers for the renewable portfolio. You anticipate needing to go to the legislature to get this?
Yeah, absolutely. This is to work with the stakeholders and allow them a voice to try and determine what is the cleanest, at what level can we get to 32%, 34%, is it 35%? That was the number that was in the draft, but that's not a final number. Is it 45%? The goal was to say, all right, if we're going to set our ceiling at whatever the costs we're paying, that we as consumers are paying for electricity right now, and let's say inflation, we will not allow that cost to go up any more than the 1 or 2% that we see in inflation. How clean can we get our air? And if it turns out we can get our air dramatically more clean within that same, without raising our costs, I think it's government malpractice not to be talking about that, and not to be trying to build an alliance that says, yeah, this makes sense.
We recently did a deep dive on the system for retention election of Colorado judges, and we found that 7 times out of 10, the voters decided to keep judges even if they got failing reviews from the State Judicial Performance Commission. Now, you appoint people to the commission, it writes the rules. Would you like them to rethink how they get this information out to voters given that performance record?
Sure, and Brandon, I give you some, I did read that whole, and I'm a slow reader, so I read the whole analysis, and I thought some things that caught my attention. One was the fact that there were not one judge gets an A, and I'm appointing a couple judges, like a period right now, I'm appointing a judge a week.
And you'd like to think you're picking A's?
Oh my gosh, we're picking, these are smart people, they're taking dramatic pay cuts, they're public servants, and a bunch of them are really smart people. And all their references are the top people in the state, and they're saying this person will be a great judge. Hard to believe that not one of them is an A. So, and then you go down, there were only 3 B minuses, and the 2 judges that were held up as people who shouldn't be reappointed, they got Bs, not B minuses. So if they're going to be, if this commission is going to suggest to voters that these judges should not be renewed, wouldn't you think they should get a C or maybe a D? So I think we should look at the grading again. And then the other issue really, because you're never going to get 100% talent. There's always going to be some people that are great lawyers, but maybe it turns out they're not great judges. That I think part of the problem is that the media doesn't pay much attention to this and doesn't go into some of the details of why this person is or isn't a good judge. And for those, again, it's a very small number of people each year that are recommended not to be retained. But in those cases, you're right. If this whole long process says that these 10 judges shouldn't be retained, and the voters retain 7 out of 10 of them, we're not doing the process properly, or we're not getting the media to pay attention and make sure the public understands it properly.
So I know RTD is its own political creature, but as a guy who came to this job from the Denver mayor's office, how disappointed are you that this new airport train has had so many reliability issues?
Well, they're debugging, and obviously it's not good. You want it to. They spend enough time putting it in service and testing it. I think I'm disappointed that it didn't do better right out of the blocks. That being said, what really matters is the long term and making sure that they get it debugged and that it becomes, a reliable, and I mean a highly reliable part of our transportation infrastructure.
Are you worried that the PR damage or whatever is going to keep people from using it for a while?
No, I don't think so.
No.
I think that the PR and the impression has been mostly positive, and there have been a couple stories that have pointed out some serious issues. I don't think that's going to drive people away from using it.
So I got this question on Twitter, and I know some other people are interested in it, and it's a simple one. Where is the Aurora theater shooter?
That I can't tell you. I can tell you that they're connecting in terms of the legal cases that are pending. They are making him available to whatever lawyers or judicial process or appeals are need to take place. We have convicts from other states that were perceived as being a danger to those around them if they stayed in the place where they had committed their crimes, and so states swap these people all the time. And again, the understanding is for the benefit of both sides. We keep those locations. We don't advertise them to the public.
So just to be clear, you can't tell me because you don't know, or you can't tell me because you're not at liberty to share it?
I'm not at liberty to share it.
Okay. Now, prosecutors say the Victim Rights Act says you have to tell the families where the perpetrator is. How is your administration interpreting that differently?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and that's the first time someone's asked me that interpretation, so I can go find that out.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested to follow up with your office about that. I mean, philosophically, though, if you put yourself in the shoes of someone who lost a family member in a tragedy like that, and they just want to know for their own peace of mind where the person is, how do you tell them that not sharing this information is the right way to go?
Because I think the authorities who understand, the people that are experts in these fields, feel that letting people know where these criminals are puts them, not only them at risk, but it puts the people around them at risk, and that they are that there is a higher level of safety on a whole number of levels by making sure that they have whatever level of anonymity is reasonable while they fulfill their, it's life in prison without parole, right? This is not any kind of easy term, right?
Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to go down 48 states, but there are several victims in that theater shooting case who are interested to know whether he's in California, specifically because his family is there. Are you able to tell me whether or not he is in that state?
I'm not able to say anything.
You can't tell me. Okay. No, we'll move on. So your party's platform calls for a $15 minimum wage, and yet you told Colorado Public Radio recently that you're undecided on the ballot question that shoots for $12 an hour. Why not support the more modest number?
There are a couple things. One is that there was no carve out for rural Colorado, and so when people are trying to harvest peaches or any of the agricultural harvests, they are on a thin edge of profitability. And right now, commodity prices for a lot of the products that are grown in Colorado are right at the edge, and in some cases below. If you look at the wheat and corn prices right now, an awful lot of farmers in Colorado are going to have a good, plentiful crop, and the price will be so low that they will not be able to break even.
So I'm hearing you think $12 actually makes sense, maybe in the metro area, just not in rural
Right,
Colorado?
and that was one of the things that was kind of presented as a possible compromise, that for whatever reason when this was being written, they didn't include that. Also the tip credit, in most restaurants, I'm not talking about fast food places, but in restaurants with waiters and waitresses and bartenders, generally the highest paid people, sometimes higher than the managers, are those tipped employees. They get tips. So, and historically, the federal government has always said, all right, if the federal minimum wage is $6, we're going to have a tip credit it was always 50%. So that meant the minimum wage you paid to tipped employees was $3. So they got paid cash.
Well, this keeps the tip discount, though. It's the same dollar amount that it is today. It's $3.02.
Right, but it doesn't grow. So what it means is that each year you're having to pay your tipped employees an extra dollar or extra 90 cents per hour, and these are your highest paid employees. Most restaurant guys are pulling their hair out trying to figure out, how do I get more money to my dishwashers, my prep cooks, my line cooks? Those are the hard, hot, very difficult jobs. And I think that most restaurateurs look at the way this, instead of allowing the tip credit just to grow the way it always has historically, they just said, all right, the tip credit's going to just stay just what it is. And, I guess I haven't made up my mind on it, but that's what my reservations are. I think if they had been, if the people that wrote the initiative had been willing to make those compromises, I'd support it 100%.
I want to make sure my premise is right. You do support the amendment that would make it harder to amend Colorado's Constitution in the
Yes.
future? All right, so you've talked fondly about states being the laboratory of democracy. Wouldn't
Sure.
this make us a much less active and interesting lab?
No, we can still do everything through the legislature. You can still,
Pot wouldn't have happened through the legislature.
What?
Pot wouldn't have happened through the legislature, would it? 20 years from now, maybe.
Well, pot would have passed even with this if this was in place.
They'd have had to go to 35 state Senate districts. You think they could have?
Yeah, sure, they would have done that.
signatures?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you don't think it's an undue burden, what they're putting?
No, I don't think it's an undue burden.
All right.
I mean, look at it this way. Our Constitution is this thick, right? The U.S. Constitution, which is, twice as old, is this thick, right? How can our Constitution be, it's almost like it's a, it's a cookbook that you're changing things all the time. Your Constitution should be something that is rarely changed, should be changed only for important issues.
Yeah. You're on record against Amendment 69, that universal health care question. I wonder the reason for that. Is it that you philosophically don't agree that we need universal health care, or is it that you don't like the structure of this particular plan, ColoradoCare?
Well, I think we have put so much time and effort trying to get to, and still have a long way to go in terms of extending coverage to cover all people, that to take all that work and throw it out and start over again with a whole different work, a whole different structure would be frustrating, if not impossible.
Yeah. So, I mean, so you don't think it's time to move to universal health care? You want to get the Obamacare and the exchange and all that dialed in better? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I think we're going to have to make some serious changes in terms of our healthcare system, but I'm not sure I'm ready to go throw the whole thing out and start all over from scratch.
Yeah. In other words, we've made too many big changes recently to like upend the system again. Is that where you're coming from?
I think that we need to make significant changes. I don't think we want to throw the whole system out.
Yeah. But do those changes look like universal health care or a state plan of any kind, or?
No. I'm certainly open to looking at extending more public health care and figuring what that might look like. If that's what in other words, there are certain places we're not getting the competition in our exchange that we want.
Yeah. You don't want to throw the private carriers out, is where you're going with that.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out, is there, obviously it's not working the way it is. I want to spend at least some serious time looking at, are there ways to fix the system without, again, starting all over again. I think people would find it amazingly frustrating, if not impossible to do.
Thinking about the presidential race, the way people talk about it, I'm just curious to know, do you view Donald Trump as a threat?
Yeah, I think Donald Trump is unstable, and he changes his mind. He's impulsive based on what comes up, and I think that is threatening to the economy in a serious way.
Differently than you might have viewed, say, a Mitt Romney or somebody.
Completely differently. I mean, I'm a business person who got into government, right? And my vision of business was that if you're doing your job right, you're providing your customers with something essential that they want, something that they need, they're willing to pay for, and that in the end, you're competing with other restaurants or whatever business you're in, but you're doing it in a kind of an accepted, fair way, that you're trying to respect certain basic principles of engagement, for lack of a better word. I did 16 restaurants, 4 or 5, loft, old warehouse renovations. I had over 200 investors. I've never been sued. I had never sued anybody. Donald Trump's been in 3,500 lawsuits. I mean, the activity by which he uses, he's declared bankruptcy, 4 times or 6 times, I can't remember. But that's, to me, not the principles that you want to import from business, right? I believe that competition, measuring things, really committing yourself to transparency around outcomes. I think that's a great thing to import from government. But to bring in someone who is using the legal system as a tool to try and gain an advantage at the expense of other people, who uses bankruptcy to not have to pay people that he otherwise could have paid, but here's a legal tool that he's not going to worry about them. I think it is a threat. He doesn't show any empathy. For a Gold Star family that's lost their child in combat defending this country, to kind of throw them under the bus, that's the opposite of the principles from business that should be held, coming in and infusing, public service.
Last one I got for you, and this ties back to your last job. We're about 12 years into the 10-year plan to end homelessness, and obviously homelessness isn't done, and I know you've been asked about that before. I'm curious to know, where do we go from here? Is ending homelessness a practical goal, or is there a better long-term approach? What do you see in the next 10 years for homelessness in the Denver area?
Well, that's something obviously we were talking about this whole year, and trying to look at what a persistent response looks like, because I think where we are now is unacceptable, and it's unacceptable in our cities and communities. If you talk to or go down on a Friday night and walk along the mall, the 16th Street Mall, there's a level of, there are a number of vagrants, and people don't feel safe for a variety of reasons. If people visiting our communities don't feel safe, then we need to figure this out. And part of it's going to be more mental health support to make sure that people that have mental health issues get the pharmaceuticals that they need. Part of it's going to be figuring out how we're going to create more housing where chronically homeless, we can make sure that chronically homeless have a place to live. And it could be a pretty small apartment, but it's got to be a place that, allows them to get off the streets.
They got to be willing to live by the rules of whatever housing you give
That's
them,
exactly
which
right.
isn't always the case. So that you can't. Can you force a fix to this?
You can't force a fix. But in the 7 years that I worked intensely on this, or 6.5 years when I was mayor, again and again we would see someone who said, I'm not cut out for the 9-to-5 life. I'm better off sleeping under this bridge. And we would have caseworkers talk to them over a long period of time, finally get them into housing, get them into wraparound support, so we take care of their addictions or their dependencies, or give them pharmaceutical support if they've got mental health issues, and get them into job training. And then once they get into a job and that company realized this was not the perfect worker that they needed some support within the workplace community, when they get that and suddenly they are part of a social framework at a business, they come up to me again and again and say, remember I told you that I was never cut out for the 9-to-5? I was just so miserable then, I didn't understand that I could make it. I thought I was someone that could never function in the real world. And you know what? I'm so much happier now. Thank you so much. I hear this, if I'm out, in downtown Denver on a weeknight or pretty much any time, I'll almost always have some guy come up to me and thank me for having helped him turn his life around.
Anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, I think I'm fine.
We've talked about a lot of things. Governor, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it as always.
Of course.